Hey there, Gabriel Nekashea here, author of Tilt, King of Orion, on to Chapter 2. A Day in the Life by the Beatles. It took every ounce of willpower Matteo had not to scratch at the nodule of tiny machines perched just above his left ear. Twice he caught himself, hand midway to his temple, before he remembered what the doctor told him. The second time he went to scratch at his new augment, Mr. Fleurs thought he had a question. Matteo couldn't recall exactly what he said that got the teacher's attention back on the lesson, but he still felt the laughter of his classmates reddening his cheeks. He glanced at the wall clock. Matteo swore the second hand went backwards for a moment. Stifling his sigh proved impossible. He compared the antique timepiece to the digital display hovering beside it on his periphery and sighed harder. The clock was accurate, at least as far as the internet knew. Towards the back of Mr. Fleur's class sat the folks who either already knew the material and didn't care to hear Mr. Fleur's interpretation of it, or didn't care to learn about social studies in the first place. Among them sat a girl Matteo thought could be pretty if she hadn't painted her face kabuki style. Beside Kabuki Girl, a pair of guys passed a single piece of notebook paper back and forth. Opposite to them, a girl played some sort of handheld game beneath her desk just out of sight of Mr. Fleur's. In front of her sat Dare, who had fallen asleep in such a way that he might have been mistaken for reading his notes. Champion. In front of Dare sat Brittany. She was not the captain of the cheer squad, but might as well have been. She seemed to know everyone, and by extension was known by everyone. Matteo glanced across the 30 or so other familiar faces and sighed a third time. He looked back at the wall clock. 4 seconds had passed. Mr. Fleurs tapped his outline on the whiteboard for emphasis, and Matteo snapped his eyes back to the front of the classroom. The board was obscured by Mel's black hair, so he leaned slightly to jot down the words that had appeared since he last checked. Mel would probably share her notes with Dare and Matteo later, but occasionally she would withhold the goods in an attempt to make Dare care more about his grades. The board read, Transhumanism, Prosthetics, Mobile Batteries, Ethics of Improving Humanity, Ship of Theseus, Education, the workforce, Homeopotest. Matteo left a space between each bullet in his notes just in case, but he almost never went back to write anything useful. Mostly, he just watched the assigned videos. The lectures didn't really help, as Mr. Fleurs had a tendency to go off on tangents. He said, when I was your age, smartphones were super expensive, but there were affordable flip phones. You could barely text with them. Wi-Fi was limited to a few key areas like coffee shops and at home. Kabuki Girl raised her hand. Why were they called flip phones? Well, you see, they folded in half like clamshells. One side had. Matteo stared at her as Mr. Fleur's anecdote wandered deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole. She wore black jeans that seemed to have had an illicit affair with a lawnmower before being stitched back together. Various patches decorated her denim vest. A skull, a snarling German shepherd, a bat, an upside-down Anarchy A, and a "Hello, my name is Pins" name tag. Smug satisfaction curled the edges of her lips as she mouthed a "hi" towards him. Matteo glanced back at the clock. Another half hour left to go before he could leave for lunch with Mel and Dare. That half hour dragged on for about 5 years. Matteo spent the majority of that time trying to figure out how many different colors were on Mr. Fleur's tie, and where he could possibly get enough sweater vests to wear a different one every day. You kids have so many more opportunities than my generation had, said Mr. Fleurs, because colleges are more likely to accept folks with augments, and because of the educational reforms after the Hero bombs. How you test is less important than the methods you use to arrive at correct answers. When you have access to basically the whole of human history at a thought, it's kind of hard to restrict access to notes and whatnot. Matteo reached up to scratch at his augment again, but caught himself. 2 weeks spiked should have been enough for the skin to heal. The bell rang. Students were already shuffling out the door or stowing books in backpacks. Mr. Fleurs said something about the chatter of teenagers drowned out whatever it was he intended to tell them. Matteo followed Mel to the door and, once Dare caught up, towards the lunchroom. The Southern California winter weather, made the walk a pleasant one. Mateo strolled along, enjoying the cool breeze. Rows of barren trees lined the path from Gilbert Hall to the main building, Warnicki Hall. "So, gents," said Mel, "have you finished your applications yet?" "They're not due for a month," said Mateo. He and Dare groaned in unison. "Plus, mine barely matters. Just gotta impress the scouts and I'm golden," said Dare. "A month is less time than you think. Also, you have to get into a school before you can play for it, regardless of what the scouts say," said Mel. They walked a ways without a word. "Whatever. Have you guys at least picked which schools you're applying to?" "Pretty much anyone that sends me an invitation package," said Mateo. "Also, my parents really want me to go to SCU. They paid for my augment so long as I applied." Mel smiled. "Have you been there yet? You know Brittany's sister goes there, right?" Mateo shrugged. "I bet we can get a quick tour of the campus one of these days. Mr. Fleurs would probably even be okay with us skipping class for it." She slowed her pace a moment, then resumed walking normally. "There, I messaged her. Let's check it out." "That actually sounds like fun," said Dare. "Maybe." They reached Warnicki Hall's broad glass doors. The cavernous structure beyond was jam-packed with weather-proof tables and bench combinations. The trio settled in at the first available group of adjacent seats. Dare pulled out his carefully measured plastic containers of fish and veggies. Melissa's meal was a batch of leftover macaroni and cheese. Mateo dug into the sandwich he'd made before school. Between bites, they talked about potential schools. This was Mel's realm of expertise, and Mateo and Dare let her steer the conversation where they knew she wanted to take it. Eventually, she offered up Stanford as her school of choice. "Only took her 7 schools before she got to it this time," said Dare. Mateo chuckled behind a mouthful of ham and cheese. "Well," said Mel, "aren't you guys applying there too?" "Not sure I see the point," said Mateo. "I think UC Silica is closer to my level." This was the opening Mel most wanted. She extolled the virtues of Stanford's augment-enabled coursework, their various majors and degree programs. She talked up their location and reminded them of the time she took a bus trip up to see the campus. This was familiar territory for all three. Her rant wound down before too long. She asked them again, "So, are you applying there or what?" "Couldn't hurt to try," said Dare. Mateo only nodded. "I'll take my free hour and give them a look while you and Dare are off doing your things. Meet me in the library after you're done with practice." Dare and Mel agreed. After lunch was Mel's flag team practice, followed by band. Dare had 2 periods devoted to baseball. In the off-season, his practices were weightlifting and conditioning heavy. Mateo had free period, followed by computer science. They spent the last few minutes of lunchtime talking about the essay portions of their applications and where they saw themselves in 10 years. Dare saw himself wealthy and fit. Mel saw herself on Mars. Mateo was a little ashamed to admit that he saw himself playing it by ear. The bell rang, and they each went their separate ways. Rivera Library stood in stark contrast to the rest of Santa Carla High School. Where most of the campus consisted of blocky structures sheathed in old tan stucco, Rivera Library had once been a megachurch. Stained glass windows adorned each wall in the library proper, and the antechambers and back areas had rooms where students would study or, more often, cause mischief. Occasionally, students in the drama club would petition that the platform which once held an altar be repurposed into a second theater. However, their requests never gained traction with the school council. "Why do we even need a library?" the theater kids would ask. "The books are all available online. Why are tax dollars going to a termite farm?" The school would argue that they functioned as a kind of museum and civic center. To their credit, Rivera Library did host a steady schedule of after-school events. Mateo's mom would occasionally volunteer to read children's stories there. While she corralled younger, local kids for evening story time, Mateo would often wander off to study. He had fond memories of learning the library's rows and secret rooms when she first started taking him. One room in particular, tucked away just past the restrooms and to the left of the debate team's dusty trophy case, was his favorite place to go when he wanted a moment to himself. The room was little more than a janitor's closet, with a few beanbag chairs scattered around the floor, but Mateo adored the seclusion and silence such remoteness offered. He closed his eyes and pulled up the application details for SCU, UC Silica, Stanford, and a few other schools. With his spike, he started copying them into a spreadsheet to see if he could reuse a few of the required essays that still needed to be written, the letters of recommendation he still needed to ask for. Just as he settled into a rhythm, someone cleared their throat. The sound was deliberate enough to distract him from his copy-pasting. Mateo's eyes snapped open, and he realized Kabuki Girl was lying across the beanbags on the opposite side of the room. For an awkward moment, they stared at each other. Mateo asked, "Can I help you?" "Not unless you've got $500 and a ticket to New Sidonia AZ," she said. The punk pointed at a sign on the wall between them. It read, "No sleeping." Her grin took on an edge. Mateo blushed. "Ha! Why Arizona? Are you running away or something?" "Something like that," she said. "What's your name, anyway?" "Mateo. Yours?" She pointed to one of her patches, the one that read, "Hello, my name is Pins." "I thought that was some kind of reference or something." "Nope, my name is, shall be, and forever remains, Pins. At least until I run away and assume a new name, like Lola, or Michelle, who knows, maybe even Matilda." Mateo reached to scratch at his spike, but stopped just close enough to brush the augment with his fingertips. It was cool to the touch. "Nice to meet you, Pins. That explains the trip, but why the $500? "Any amount at all would help, really. I'm saving up for something like what you have poking out the side of your head." "You want to get spiked?" "Nah, just want a pair of smart glasses. The kind that interface with the gray matter, though, not the old style that need a cell phone. Even got a pair in mind. Cyclops 5s. The kabuki face paint made her smile look more like a snarl. Still, Mateo felt his cheeks reddening further. She adjusted in her seat and asked, "So, got any change? Every little bit helps." Mateo pulled a virtual $20 bill out of his account that he had intended to use as gas money. He was certain Pins couldn't see it, but if he gave it to her, her cell should process the transaction. He hesitated. One thing first. "Shoot. I'd like to know why you derailed Mr. Fleur's lecture earlier." "I like his stories. They're better than the lectures anyway. All he does there is regurgitate the reading." She reached her hand toward Mateo, palm up, and flexed her fingers in the universal sign of gimme. She said, "I'm not going to beg, unless begging will score me extra? Actually, scratch that." Mateo handed Pins the illusory 20. It folded into a little tube in her open hand before hovering off and tucking itself in a tiny pocket behind the "Hello, my name is Pins" patch. Her cell phone chirped a confirmation from within that pocket. "Thank you. I promise I'll repay you just as soon as I can. Mateo, right?" "Yeah. I won't forget. Thank you." As she started to walk out the door, she bumped into Mel. It took them a moment to disentangle themselves. "Sorry about that," said Mel and Pins in unison. Mel sidestepped past the kabuki girl and sat down next to Mateo. She said, "So the SCU trip is on. Mr. Fleurs wants us to ask around for more folks to make it look more official. Brittany and Johnny signed up." "Nice," said Mateo. "I take it band let out early?" Melissa nodded. From the door, Pins asked, "You guys are visiting SCU?" Mel stammered, Yeah, tomorrow. Would you like to join us?" Pins said, "That'd be great. My boyfriend goes there. See y'all tomorrow." She did not wait for a reply before walking out the door. All right. And that's chapter 2, A Day in the Life. Thanks. I hope you all have a good day. Bye.